Hi, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Robbins, and I'm a psychologist and medium. And here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today on the show, I have Ann Moss Rogers. Ann is the author of the book Diary of a Broken Mind and is an emotionally naked motivational speaker who helps people foster a culture of connection to prevent suicide and find life after loss. Despite her family's best efforts, Ann Moss's 20-year-old son Charles died by suicide June 5th, 2015, after many years of struggling with anxiety, depression, and ultimately addiction. Ann Moss started a blog, emotionallynaked.com, and chronicled her family's tragedy in a newspaper article that went viral. She has been featured in the New York Times and was the first suicide loss survivor ever invited to speak at the National Institute of Mental Health. She lives in Richmond, Virginia with her husband Randy. Her surviving son Richard is a filmmaker living his dream in LA. Welcome, Ann, to the program.
Thank you. And I have to say that my first name is actually Ann Moss. It's a double name. It's a Southern thing.
Okay. Ann Moss.
Yes.
I apologize about that.
No, I have to tell everybody that, unless they were born in North Carolina.
Well, I certainly was not. I'm a Midwestern girl. So, Ann Moss.
Yes.
All one.
That's
okay.
it.
So, first, let's start. I love the name of your blog. Why did you come up with Emotionally Naked?
Well, I had just lost my son to suicide, and it was about 9 months later. And I was running, and I thought, I need to start a blog because I had been writing on Facebook. And what I found is I couldn't find those posts when I wanted, somebody would ask a question and I want to send a link to them. And doing that on Facebook is difficult. So I said, I need to start a blog, like the rest of the world. And then I thought, Moss, that's not that original. And I said, I'm going to do that anyway. And what am I going to call it? And I'm running, and all of a sudden it hits me. I'm going to call it Emotionally Naked. I ran home so fast, and I started it that day. I had a few tweaks, and I used a real basic WordPress theme, and that started to feel good. And I transferred some of my posts from Facebook, the ones I could find, into the blog, and I just started writing. I needed to write. It hurt so much, and I just needed to find some relief. And the funny part is, with writing, it actually hurts so much while you're doing it. But then afterwards, there is a feeling of relief or release, like I can let it go. And that felt good to me. So I put my diary or my journal online, and I wouldn't say that was something everybody should do, but it worked for me.
Well, and I think, for my listeners who we've been talking about sort of when you get divine guidance or some sort of something that feels bigger than you, kind of pushing you towards something, it feels like that's what happened for you when you were running, which when I could run was very meditative, and I found things would come to me in that space as well, is that you're open in a way, and it sounds like you felt a pull towards something and then just went with it.
I did. There have been several instances where things have felt like that, Amy, and this was one of them. And being on stage the first time, speaking about my son, I'm a professional speaker on the subject.
And you have a TED Talk, which is wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. The first time I was on stage after he died and I was talking about him, I thought, before I got on, I thought, I hope I make it through. And once I got out there and I started doing it, I felt him with me. because he was really good on stage, and that's where he didn't feel depressed or anxious, and he thrived on that. And once I felt him with me, I was addicted, and I just couldn't let go. So there've been several times things have happened or something's happened that I can't quite explain, and I'm a big skeptic, and I'm not like super, oh my gosh, there's this third world, but it's really opened me up to really understanding that, yeah, there's something out there. There's something that we can't define.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't even explain it. And sometimes I want to hold on to those moments, and then they just, vaporize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's so hard when you have that experience because you want to freeze time.
You do. Exactly.
It feels like you're bigger. It feels bigger than a human experience.
It does. And this whole thing feels that way. Like, why would I sell a successful company and go make nothing? I'd make something now, but not like I made before. Why would I spend 3 years when I just sold a company that had a potential to be, make me $1 million? I don't know. That's not where my passion was. And something was pushing me forward to share this cause.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been brutal. It's been just brutal. It's like pushing a spiked ball uphill. I mean, it's, suicide, addiction, mental illness. Oh yeah, everybody wants to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know. And it feels like you're in the muck. It's mucky. It
is mucky. And where I get the most support is other people who have traveled this journey that I'm on, or ones that fear that any day they may be traveling the same journey.
The journey of a loss of a child, or the journey of a loss of a child to suicide?
Both. I mean,
okay.
There is the journey to the loss of a child, because loss of a child, no matter what, hurts.
And I think that any parent would say that that's their biggest fear.
Yes.
Probably bigger than even something happening to them is the anticipated pain of losing a child.
And it's nothing like I thought, because I did imagine it. My son suffered from depression and addiction, and it crossed my mind that he would die of overdose. Suicide never, ever entered my mind. That was a complete and total shock to me. But yeah, I thought, well, if I lost him, he would be, you do think at some point, well, maybe that would give them some relief.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh, can't believe I thought that. But all of us have, after talking to a lot of mothers, and they'll guiltily, look down, and they've thought about it too when they've struggled with a child a lot, because, you see what kind of quality of life are they going to have?
Mm-hmm.
You just don't know. And then you refuel and you come back, and certainly, it just kind of was a fleeting thought, maybe once or twice, in years and years and years of struggling.
Yeah, and I love your honesty around that. It's like, would it be better for them to not struggle and suffer like this?
Right. And I probably don't know that I would say it on any other podcast other than this one, to be honest with you, because it does make me sound sort of dismissive, like I wanted this to happen. But in speaking to other parents, it did flash in their mind. And after I lost him, there was this thought of, I wondered that at one point, I wonder if that caused or made this happen. Mm-hmm. And of course it wasn't, because there have other been parents that have told me, well, I felt that and it didn't happen, or it hasn't happened. So,
Right.
You just see a human being suffer to a point, and you understand sometimes that they don't want to be here. Although I never knew Charles was suicidal, ever. And I would have helped him if I had known what to do, or known that he struggled in that way. And it wasn't until after I read his lyrics that he left that I understood he struggled with thoughts of suicide for many years. I mean, probably since middle school.
And there's so much shame around it.
There is.
And I think that people think that when you put words to suicide, or you have someone talk about what they're feeling or thinking around it, it's going to increase the probability that they're going to do it. And I remember learning in grad school that it's actually quite the opposite. That if someone is having those thoughts, the more you can engage them in conversation around it, the less likely they are to actually act on it.
You're exactly right. I mean, question I get from every parent is, if you talk about suicide, won't I give them the idea? And I can understand.
If they're thinking about it, they've got right.
It's already.
If you're thinking about it, it's already an idea for them.
And what is it? 5 or 6 studies have proved that more people reach out when you start to discuss suicide. Now, if you are with teenagers and you get real specific, talking real emotional topics like method and going into just really graphic detail, but that's not acceptable conversation to share with anyone, least of all young people. So,
except your therapist, you can talk about it with your therapist.
Exactly. And so, some of us mothers do with each other. We will pull aside, and sometimes we will have those very private conversations of, I didn't walk in on my child, but a number of people I know did. And sometimes they just need to talk about that. And I'm okay with listening to that. And most human beings are not.
Yeah. Well, we don't, one, because it's so painful, right, to hear someone experience that. And 2, we typically don't do a great job talking about death in our culture, no matter how someone gets there. So the combination of that makes for tough conversations. It
does. And so all these things I speak about are just topics that are high rejection and pushback, and no, we don't want to talk about that here, or we don't want to talk about it at cocktail hour or breakfast or brunch, or while we're sleeping or on vacation.
Right. So, or ever. Right.
Oh, well, right. Never would be good.
And so when people experience a loss like this, it's often difficult to make meaning out of it. But you've done that. So how have you made meaning out of your son's loss?
Mainly because I focused on the fact that he connected with human beings in a way that other people don't. And that's what made him so popular, because he was the funniest, most popular kid in school. And I decided that connection piece was where I would focus things, because as funny and as talented as he was, I think that was his greatest gift, was letting other people know that they matter. And that's pretty much the legacy that I'm pushing forward. And at first, I didn't see anything other than, how am I going to make it from one day to the next? And then I decided I would go public with the topics, because it was because I was not educated that I missed the signs of my own son's suicide, which could have been bullet points under the phrase, what do people thinking of suicide say? And I thought, we need to have more of a conversation about this. So I also became, in addition to keynote speaking, I do a workshop called Safe Talk. And that's to educate people in the community on what people say, and then what to do. So it's a 4-hour evidence-based training. And it's one of those things I do to give back to my community, because when I give, I get back and I heal. And that's kind of been the strategy that worked for me.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think so many people can kind of isolate themselves when something like this happens. And then you just feel more and more removed from life.
And I have talked to people who said, well, the only way I survive is that I don't talk about it. But they'll be 15 years out and they're still struggling in a way that is more indicative of early grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like I didn't want to be stuck there. So in my case, I think letting it out in some way, talking about it, writing about it, you can't push that pain away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just can't. I mean, it's kind of, I'll always say grief is like a girdle. If you put it on and then you squeeze it too tight, you know, that grief is going to pop out somewhere like fat does.
Right. And it might not look as pretty.
No, and it's going to be real ugly because it comes out in like anger, bitterness, not moving forward with your life, not participating with family. And that basically can just ruin the rest of your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want that for myself.
Well, and you said, I was taking notes while you were speaking because you wrote down the greatest gift was him letting other people know that they matter.
Yeah.
And at 20, what an amazing gift to give people.
Yeah, he was.
Like to know that at 20, that's important.
He always did know that. And he always did it. I mean, if a new kid came to school, I mean, he'd be the first one at the door, greeting the child. Do you want to sit with me at lunch? Moving van would pull in the neighborhood. He was the first one at the door. I wanted to introduce myself. Would you like to come out and play? I mean, they weren't even unloaded, and he was over there introducing himself. And he was just that kind of person. And somebody shared a story with me that I hadn't heard until after he died. And this young lady said that she suffered from depression. And so one day she went to school and she was feeling really down. And she's standing in the hallway with a bunch of friends. And she's really, really struggling, but her friends don't notice. And she looks up and she sees Charles staring at her. And she said, Miss Rogers, everybody knew Charles. She said, but I don't think he knew me. And we'd never spoken, so I didn't know why he was staring at me. He makes a beeline towards her, stops about a foot in front of her, and breaks out into a rap song he created on the spot just for her. And of course, the friends are like, oh my gosh, you know, who died and made her a movie star? Mm-hmm. And they're all kind of stunned. And then they start to die laughing. And he bends down and he hugs her. And he said, pretty girls shouldn't look so sad. And he made his way down the hall. And she said, of all the things anybody had ever done for her, she would always remember that. Because, you know, who does that? It was original. It was so focused on her in that moment to make herself feel better. And it, you know, he really touched her. And who does do that? Do any of us do anything that's that dramatic?
Right.
For another human being that, you know, they'll never forget that.
Right.
It's like that.
It's amazing.
He was an amazing human being.
It sounds like it. Even in the short time that we've spoken, like it just sounds like he really knew what mattered.
He did. He did.
And what, I hate to use the word lessons because I think this feels like we shouldn't as parents have to learn the lesson of losing a child in any way, but particularly by suicide. But what do you feel like you've learned, and how do you feel like you're living differently?
You know, when your child dies, your life is now split up in before and after. So every picture somebody shows me, every incident they tell me about, I classify it immediately in my brain as before or after the death.
Mm-hmm. Literally BC, right?
Yeah, because
BC.
that was the day I just became somebody else or transformed into something else. And I have to say that it forces you to prioritize your life and focus on the things that matter most. And it forces you to find joy in the little things. We always think happiness is like this holy grail that we're going to go find at the top of the mountain. And
then once we get there, we're done.
We're done, you know.
Right.
But life doesn't work like that. Life is a series of wonderful events and tragedy and the stuff in between. And we need to learn to manage that. And we need to learn how to, you know, however you want to pray or ask for the strength to get through those difficult times, because there is joy out there and we need to be open to seeing it. And if we start seeing everything through a negative lens, that's all we're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I had to get up every morning after he died and think of one thing I was grateful for. And let me tell you, that first week, it was not easy. So the
first week, my God.
Oh, I mean,
I would imagine the first, you know, at least year, if not.
Right. But the first week, it was stuff like, well, at least he wasn't killed by a serial killer and dismembered and had, I mean, seriously, I mean,
right.
What a thing to be grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
But at the start, I struggled to find, and then it was, well, my husband's alive and my son's alive. That was one day. And then, you know, I did kind of a lot of weird ones first before I finally got into a good rhythm of, you know, think of one thing you're grateful for that like made sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it worked, you know, and I told myself I would survive. And the way I made it from one day to the next was, as bad as it is right now, it will never be as bad as getting the news. That part is over. And I will never feel that bad again.
Mm-hmm.
And also recognizing that grief has its own rhythm, that pain can be so intense, but it doesn't last forever. And you think, oh my gosh, I've got to get out from under this. It's the worst. And you're trying to push it away. And you just succumb to it. And then it lifts. And then you're finding some relief. I can get, you know, the dishes washed or my underwear cleaned or some other basic task that's been put aside. But at first, just finding any moment or any glimmer is just very difficult. And but you emerge a stronger human being. You know, would that have been the way I wanted to do it? Absolutely not. But I don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I say this all the time. And I think I said this when we first spoke. You do have a choice.
That's true.
The other choice just, you know, isn't going to be a life well lived.
Right? Exactly. Not a life well lived. And then there are parents that when they lose a child to any cause of death, because, you know, losing a child hurts, period. It can't hurt more. Are more at risk for suicide than the general population. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, I did not have those tendencies or those thoughts, but I do know that at least 30% of parents do. And that includes people who have never, ever had those thoughts ever before in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would believe it because I think to your point, which is beautifully said, when we resist any feeling, I think it just persists, and it persists stronger.
Right.
And so, rather than kind of surrendering to the pain and allowing yourself to feel it, just like you have to do with happiness and joy, like you have to surrender to that and allow yourself to feel it, because I believe at any moment it could be the pain, right? I mean, that's the kind of the yin and yang of life. And for you to just speak to that is so powerful. It's like, just allow yourself to be in the pain, because it doesn't last forever, and no feeling does.
They're all feelings are temporary, and you can't heal if you can't feel. Mm-hmm. And if you put it aside, or you try to numb it with alcohol or drugs because you want to make it to the next day, then you're always going to have to do that to make it to the next day. Mm-hmm. You just got to experience it.
Right. And I heard this at I forget where I heard this, but sorry for whoever told me this, and I'm not crediting. But if you tell me that, if you're listening and you were the one that told me, I will acknowledge you. All feelings are, emotions is energy in motion. Emotion, energy in motion. And if you allow it to kind of move, it will move. It's just energy.
Right. Exactly. I mean, even now it hurts, but I know the rhythm of grief, and those waves are much shorter than they used to be. Mm-hmm.
So it's the holiday season, which can be so difficult. And we were just talking earlier before I started recording that it's hard. What do you find most helpful during this time of year for people, for yourself, for others?
I think it is acknowledging the pain. It is making plans and having rituals. All of those help you manage that loss. And you want to remember your loved one and think about ways in which you're going to bring them in the conversation. Think about, am I going to hang out the stocking? Am I not? Create a new tradition, in honor of your loved one. Mm-hmm. And, that does help. I tend to go a little bit more spaghetti brain, and it's already starting to kind of happen where I'm just kind of a little mushier, not able to follow everything perfectly. And it'll start to get worse, and then right before Christmas it actually lifts and gets a little better, because my family's around then, and that helps. But it's all this holiday mishmash and the songs, and it just assaults you, and I just feel physically assaulted by Christmas sometimes, and all this extra stuff to do at a time when I'm really struggling. So that month asks more of you. Mm-hmm. And I don't have more to give. I have less to give. And there is some emotional hibernation. I take out moments for myself, mindfulness, that, I go in the corner and cry and, think about the child I lost. And now this grief thing is my tie to my loved one, and it's all I've got. Mm-hmm. So those memories, I cuddle up with them more, whereas I would like to push them away at first because they were so intense. But now I invite them in because I need those memories to remember it.
Mm-hmm. And that's so beautiful and well said. And I also think that just the acknowledgement of the person you've lost, and that at this time of year, so many people are walking around with some sort of loss. And if they're experiencing any kind of mush in their brain, like you are talking about, which I imagine lots of people do, just be kind to everybody, right? Like everybody is walking through some sort of pain. Particularly, I think it's illuminated at the time where things in theory are supposed to look happier and more joyful. Doesn't mean there's not a lot to be joyful about. It just means that there are people who are also struggling with, it could be any type of loss. It doesn't have to be loss of a child. It can be loss of a parent. It could be a loss of a marriage. It could be loss of a job. It could be loss of a dream that you had that didn't happen.
Right.
Loss of a goal as we're reflecting on what we accomplished this year. All of that.
Yeah, this time of year punctuates a lot of things. And again, the giving back is what helps me start to manage those feelings. Mm-hmm. And I don't demand, if I don't. So we finally put out a Christmas tree for the first time last year. But there's a little Christmas tree and decorated it. And it had lights on it. So what we did is we covered it up and put it in the closet. So all we have to do is pull it out this year. And there it is. And I don't do much decorating. I don't want to. So I don't ask that of myself. And if I have people over and I have minimal decoration, so be it. I don't care.
Right.
They know my situation, and I'm just not going to not have people over because I don't have it beautifully decorated in every corner of the house. That's my choice. And there's plenty of decorations everywhere else. And, I just don't have the energy to put myself in that kind of celebration.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. Ann Moss, where can people find you if they're interested? And where can they watch your TED Talk? Probably on TED. Right?
You can go, actually, I have a speaker site, annmossrogers.com, and it's called Can a Blog Save Lives? And it's at the very top of that page right now. And the other is my blog, Emotionally Naked. And that's where you'll find my book, Diary of a Broken Mind, that sold out at Barnes & Noble twice online when it first came out. So
wow, that's pretty impressive.
I was pretty excited about that. They didn't buy a huge quantity, but a sellout is a sellout.
Exactly. If I wrote a book and I sold one, that would be...
Yeah, I'm hoping I haven't sold more than one, thank goodness.
Right.
But, being...
Not my husband buying it or my parents.
Right? I don't know if that counts.
So those are all the places they can find you, and it will also be on my show notes.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a great interview with some really, really useful tips for people. So I hope that they can kind of embody some of what you shared, whatever their experience is, loss, no significant loss. You said some really profound things that I think people can take with them in their lives. So thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have, let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.